Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something New Live, The Why, with Scott MacGregor and Annie Leib. How are you, Scott?
I am fantastic.
This is what he says every day. I have to tell you that, I do my own thing. I have Living with Anitude. I've created this brand, and there are not many people on this earth that could sort of push me in the direction of completely just something new and it taking over my life, and I'm aligning it completely with its values and everything that you stand for, except for this guy. So I gotta say, you have a strong presence, my friend.
Thank you. I feel the same. This is a kind of a match made in heaven. We've got a great team, I think, no doubt about it.
And everybody is that's probably tuning in is aware of the team. We have a super presence, and everybody knows what, people over everything and something new and what we stand for. But I think the best part of the discussion and what I'm hearing people ask is what really is our why. Right. And I think there's no better person to talk to about that than you. And why is now the time?
Yep. So our why started 6 years ago, almost 6 years ago, when I started Something New. And I started Something New because as a chief revenue officer, I was insanely frustrated with my experiences with recruiters. So 17 years as a CRO will do that to you. And I just thought it was broken. So if it's broken, fix it. And I kind of could figure out how to solve my own problems. So it was just a matter of doing that and then jumping into something I love, which is relationship building. So when we created Something New, one of the big goals was to give back. And I think a lot of people know us for our social mission component of our business, which is called Something Good. But in order to give back in a substantial way, you've got to have money. And the way that we make money is as a talent strategy company. And talent strategy, I think people kind of sort of maybe know what that is. Mm-hmm. But it's, for us, it's a basket of unique offerings that we've created that have been extremely well received by our clients. Everything from talent acquisition or recruiting done in a completely different way, to advisory services, which obviously you're involved in, with Something New Labs, and then for individuals, career ideas, to really help people have a strategic partner to help walk them through all the complexities of building a career.
So let's back up for just a minute. So I heard you say that recruiting was broken and it bothered you, and that's sort of why this started. So can we back up for a second? Tell me a little bit more about what was broken. When you said that, I want to understand what was broken about recruiting.
So I worked with literally dozens and dozens and dozens of recruiting firms, from big firms to small firms. And I got very much the same thing. A lot of resumes thrown my way with not a lot of thought behind it. Not a lot of due diligence to really get to know what a perfect candidate looked like for me. And maybe even more importantly, I kept thinking to myself, these are people that have dedicated their work life, their career, to talent. So they would logically be the ones that were saying, hey, Scott, why don't you try this? I've seen this as a best practice. I know you're saying this, but I think you'd be better off if you did this.
Like giving
pushing back. So I was getting no advice. No one was ever giving me best practices. And I was like, well, they just seem like they just want to get a check. They just want to make a placement. And however that happens, even if it's a real sloppy process, they really didn't care. I wanted to learn. I wanted to build. I knew talent. I always knew from probably even before I became a manager in my mid-20s. I always knew that people were the engine that fueled a company. That if you had good people, you could accomplish great things. If you have mediocre people, you're probably not going to accomplish great things. And if you really have subpar people, you're doomed. So I've always known that. And I was frustrated. I just thought, why are the fees set the way they are? Made no sense. why aren't they asking me more questions than just give me a job description? Or even when I give them a job description, why just accept that at face value? The chances that my job description was perfect are probably zero, but they were never pushing back. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to learn, like, how do I do this better? Because I knew that was going to really translate into the success of my company.
Gotcha. So those pieces were sort of broken, missing, and you came out of it just like, I can do this differently.
Yeah.
I can think differently. I can put truly what we always say, people over everything.
Yeah.
So tell me about when you created something new and what's happening with it now that equates to fixing those broken pieces.
A lot of it, I think, is being careless. I thought a lot of recruiters were careless with candidates in putting them potentially in spots that weren't a good fit. I know I would get resumes and I would think, boy, this person, or I'd have a conversation and I would know that there was not a lot of due diligence and vetting done because they were really putting somebody in a position that they didn't really want to be in. And I thought, we all have a fiduciary responsibility, and we have just a responsibility as good human beings to try to do right by people, because your career, I mean, if you look back on your career, it's affected your finances, your relationships, your physical health, your mental health. So when you're not really very, very careful and diligent about trying to put people in a good spot, you're doing them a huge disservice, and you're doing your client a huge disservice. So I don't know. I as goofy as that we are from our morning calls, I take this stuff very seriously. Putting a person in a company and giving that company the talent that they need, like, I take that deadly serious, because you're really altering the potential trajectory of that company's success, and you're impacting that individual's life tremendously. So, you've got to just come at it with a mindset that these things are important, and we're gonna dedicate the time and energy it takes to make sure that the puzzle pieces really fit.
So that makes total sense, but get a little bit deeper with me about the parts of the experience with a client that you are going through, step by step, sort of some of the things that, because what I think the overarching theme of what you and I have discussed and what the team we've discussed is that people sometimes think something new, okay, recruiting firm, right? Like, and you're finding candidates jobs. That's what people equate to recruiting. And we're very different than that. So I sort of wanted you to go into how we're different.
So, I mean, at a really tactical level on the recruiting side, and then we could maybe talk about labs, but on the recruiting side, it starts with what we created, which is called an ASAP. It stands for Accurate Search Accelerated Placement. And it's really just investing the time to figure out what perfect looks like for that individual, because perfect for that individual is different from perfect for anybody else.
Right.
And then we do it on the client side. So when you're doing that, you then have two puzzle pieces, because you really understand what perfect looks like for both. And then if the puzzle pieces align and fit, you've got a match. But if they don't, you don't worry about it and you move on until you find the perfect piece. That sounds very basic, but that's really not done in recruiting. And the way that I could prove it is, I know myself, I got a lot of calls from recruiters and they would say, Scott, I've got the perfect job for you. And I would think, you don't even know who I am. How in the world would you know that you've got the perfect job for me? You know nothing about me. You don't know me. So that's kind of crazy that people are jumping to that assumption. I mean, if a stranger called you and said, I've got the perfect, life partner for you, you'd be like, what are you talking about?
You don't know me.
You don't know anything about me.
Right.
So that's obviously completely broken. So we've really put a very, very stringent process in place to make that a very different experience from the candidate side and the client side. And then we use data to make decisions, because the haphazard way that companies make decisions on candidates is actually pretty scary. And there are certain industries, and I'll use professional sports as an example, they use a ton of data to make good decisions about their employees, their players. But corporate America seems to think that an unqualified person can walk into a conference room or jump on a Zoom call and ask questions and figure out whether that person is a good fit or not. And that's just not the way it works. So we created a proprietary scorecarding system that's very, very involved, that really helps companies make data-driven decisions. And it really forces a lot of the bias out of that process. So we walk into any situation where we're meeting somebody and we have a bias to like them or not like them based on all kinds of different things. Like, I don't like you because you like the Eagles, but
I know that from jump through.
I do like you.
It's a little bit true. A little bit true.
But people make just these decisions that have nothing to do with whether you can actually do the job in the environment of that company and succeed and bring them success. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so what you're telling me is that most companies, not only do they have a haphazard process, they don't know who's going to be doing the interviewing, or if they do know who is doing it, they don't all ask the same question. So what scale are they using, right? And then on top of that, they're not even sure sometimes of the actual what the job description should be, because they haven't gone through that and what it should actually say and who you're actually looking for. So how can companies be finding the right talent?
Yeah, they can't. And that's why you have huge issues with turnover. And I think, people have become so accustomed to turnover that they're like, hey, listen, that's just the way it is. So they accept it, and they accept this insanely expensive turnover. Where not only tribal knowledge is leaving their company, but incredible talent to get the job done. And it's just so costly. And it is unnecessary if you take a different approach. But, I always say, if you've got 4 or 5 people that are vetting a candidate, I would bet my house, I would bet anything that if I put them in separate rooms and I said, what are you looking for in a chief revenue officer or chief marketing officer or whatever the search may be, I would get completely different answers. Right. So how do you find the right person when your stakeholders that are vetting candidates don't even agree on what you're looking for? Right. But that's the way that it works.
And how often do companies really sit down and talk about this stuff? I mean, how often is like a meeting on the books about talent strategy?
So, I've been a CRO, so I've sat in a ton of executive meetings with, all the department heads of my former company. And I speak with CEOs every day. Their calendars are not filled up with meetings about talent strategy, which is a little bit of a head scratcher, because when you think about it, any company's number one expense, I've never found a CEO who's told me that anything other than labor or people is their number one expense. Never.
However, they're not meeting about it.
Right. And the number one predictor of success or failure is people, because people are at the genesis of everything. I mean, they create your product, they create your service, they create your process. So it all starts and ends with people, and they dictate your success. Yet CEOs and leaders are not taking the time to sit down and say, let's really talk about our talent strategy. How are we going to attack talent acquisition? How are we going to attack onboarding? how are we going to attack retention? Because if you have those things nailed, your chances of success are astronomically high. And by the way, a byproduct of that is your chances of having a great culture are almost guaranteed.
So that's exactly what I was going to ask you next. So we talk about all this and strategy and all of these words and things that CEOs and leadership should be doing, right? But what are the benefits of doing it? What are some of the things that these companies can feel and see and, really touch that are sort of tangible when these things are put in place?
Top and bottom line revenue growth. So I think a lot of people think that the people side of business, they see it as kind of like soft and fluffy, and culture is kind of like this feel good kumbaya type of thing. And that's one of the reasons why HR, I would say in 99% of companies, is the least powerful department in an organization. And if you talk to the Jack Welches of the world, and if you talk to, a Gary Vaynerchuk, they'll tell you that's the most important. But companies, I think, for some reason, seem to think that it's kind of this fluffy thing. But at the end of the day, the way to guarantee revenue growth, my former company, we grew double digits every year for 17 straight years.
Wow.
That was revenue. Why? One of the reasons, we went 9 years, almost a decade, and in my group, which was sales, marketing, and client success, we never had anyone leave. We had no turnover from people leaving in 9 years. So our ability to grow was all based on our people strategy.
We have a visitor. We have a couple of visitors actually. I was holding them back. Exactly. Growth is the number one result when you invest in your talent strategy. So yeah, I mean, those are sort of the pieces and the benefits of doing this. And, back to, I guess what I would say is how do you implement this in our company, in something new? And how do you sort of evidence, are you putting your money where your mouth is, I would say?
Are we doing it ourselves?
Yep.
Yeah, we certainly are. So all of the things that we teach companies, we don't want to be the cobbler with no shoes. So, we do these things ourselves. And, I did these in my former company, and I saw the exponential growth from, almost no employees to hundreds of employees, and almost no revenue to tens of millions of dollars in revenue. So I've seen it work. I've seen it in action, and we've implemented it at Something New. And I think, we've had a fair amount of success.
That's how you get all those rock star employees, right?
No doubt about it.
So we have a question. I love this. With all the industries that are going through enormous closures, how do you help those people in transition to a new industry, or companies see transitioning talent in new ways to fit into available roles?
It's very hard for companies to see people from a different industry and embrace them into their organization. I think the reason for it is they don't know how to evaluate the talent. They don't know the key characteristics that make somebody successful, which are not industry specific. And then the truth of the matter is, most companies, I would say, especially in the startup world, they don't really have a great onboarding program. So if you don't have great onboarding, you need people to come to you with deep industry experience. But it's not really necessary, because what makes people successful in most organizations are intangibles that are somewhat universal. Things like empathy, work ethic, resiliency, discipline, things like that. That has nothing to do with an industry. So I think, unfortunately, for people that are looking to transition out of an industry into another one, it is difficult, because companies really struggle to define those things that make a great employee, and they don't have strong onboarding. So they just revert to, okay, we're just going to take people that are safe.
Right. That are
which is a big mistake. For individuals, I think it's really important to evaluate and be truthful about what is your skill set? What are you really good at? How is it transferable? Because most of those things, like the things I just mentioned, work ethic and discipline and empathy and great listening and really great communication skills, you can use those in any industry. And just figuring out what's maybe an adjacent industry that you could get into where you could leverage those skill sets without having specific industry skills.
So you mentioned onboarding, and we're not going to get totally into Something New Labs today, because we just don't have time and we have more shows to do. But tell me a little bit more about onboarding and what makes the onboarding part of Labs so special.
So onboarding is, it's kind of like, okay, now you're married. It's what happens after, if you were showering somebody with cards and flowers kind of in the wooing process, but then all of a sudden you're married and it's like, boom, that stops. And it's like, good luck. That's probably not going to end very well. But companies, you and I were talking to somebody the other day and they said, I meet somebody in the lobby and give them their laptop and I give them some other information and, didn't quite say this, but pretty much pat them on the back and like, good luck.
You're on your way.
That's not onboarding. So it's being very, very thoughtful. It's having a plan. When I talk to companies, and I know when you talk to companies and we say, really tell me in depth, like, how do you think about onboarding? First, it's a mindset. And then it's, what's the actual plan? Like, what do you have in place? You have checklists for what do you do 2 weeks before the person starts? What do you do a week before they start? What does day one look like? What's that first month look like? What does day 91 look like? All of those things are so important. But if you don't sit down and codify that stuff and actually come up with a plan, you're just going to wing it. And maybe that experience will be good, maybe it won't. But so many people fail, not because they don't have the skill or the will to do the job. It's just they've had a really bad experience getting integrated into the organization.
And they don't have a plan. There's no plan or process.
There's no process.
There's no process. So what does, in the short time that we have left, believe it or not, what does a plan look like when an employee, you get the perfect employee? It really is truly the perfect employee because you've worked with Something New and, you've gone through exactly what you're looking for, the job description, you've gone through, everything that we've taught you. What does onboarding look like?
Yeah, we definitely don't have enough time to talk through what perfect onboarding looks like. So I think we have a module that we teach, which is extremely extensive, and it goes, it's hours and hours and hours of content.
Education.
But it's really just making sure that you have a process that you stick to, that you have people that know what their assignments are, that you start with kind of, what do we want this experience to look like? I mean, there's so many companies that don't really even think like a candidate. Like, what is it like to start a new job? Are you sensitive to that? I mean, I'll use a silly example, but, there are times that people come in, they sit at their desk and open their desk drawer, and there's, ketchup packages and loose change and,
this is true story.
Business card from the person who sat there before. I mean, that's a horrible experience. So I think, you have to always be thinking, what's your experience? What do you want that to look like? And what's that mindset so that when you know that Bobby or Sally are starting, you're empathetic to the fact that they're probably coming in, they're nervous, they're a little bit afraid. How do you get them to feel like part of the organization? And are you even thinking about this stuff? And are you talking about it enough that you put these strategies and processes in place that get people up to speed very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads to the next step, which is retention and keeping your employees and how important that is. I think the main thread to just leave with anybody listening or anybody listening in the future is just that there's a real lack of process. And it's just not something that a lot of people, a lot of companies are putting into play. And I think they just don't know how, or they don't see the level of importance. And that's what Something New does differently. Do you agree?
Yeah, I look at everything as if it's manufacturing. So if you're manufacturing anything from cakes to cars, when you manufacture something, you want consistent results. So you want every cake to be delicious, and you want every car to be safe, etc. So obviously, in those examples, there are very strict processes in place to ensure that that car is manufactured exactly like the one before it and the one that's going to be manufactured, down the line. But with people, your most expensive asset and your best asset, people they just kind of wing it. They don't sit around and actually write it down.
You made such a great analogy when we were talking a couple of weeks ago. You said, like you just said about the car, you said, when you go into Ford and you're talking to them about how they make cars and how it's done, do they say, like, sometimes we do this, occasionally we add this in, we're not sure, but we're just going to wing it, we'll work through it, or maybe? Those words aren't used, right? Like, they're just not used. But yet in talent strategy, where it doesn't exist, we might have Bill interview, this is the job description, but it's loose. You can change it if you want. We're not really sure their job duties. And that never happens. Same with making a cake. You don't say maybe a little bit of this and a little bit of that if you want to make good cakes, right?
Agreed.
So I think that, you're king of analogies, and they stuck with me. So I just wanted to see if that resonates with people, because I think it really does sort of, like, you've really done a good job today of framing why Something New is doing things differently and how it can benefit companies.
These things are not rocket science. No. They literally are taking the time to sit down in a conference room or on a Zoom call and say, we're going to dedicate the next hour to figuring out this piece of our talent acquisition strategy or our onboarding strategy or our retention strategy, and doing that until you have a rock solid foundation. So you've got a playbook, you've got something you don't deviate from, you have something that you can share with new leaders in the company, you've got consistency across the board. People are doing things the same way. McDonald's is known for consistency. So whether you get a burger, in Des Moines or whether you get a burger in Boston, it's exactly the same. The experience is the same. Yet companies kind of just do things differently and expect different results. And that's kind of magical thinking.
Yeah, it really is. When it comes down to it, it's quite simple. But it's just people sort of understanding and companies understanding what the root of all of these issues are from and how to become more successful.
Yeah.
So I loved having you. It's toward the end of our time, but anything you want to leave the audience with today, Scotty Mac?
No, I mean, I think everything starts with a mindset. If you don't have a mindset, we say people over everything, and people over everything is not, again, like some soft kumbaya thing. People over everything is recognizing that your greatest asset as a company are your people, and your greatest chance to be successful, to drive revenue, is by being very methodical and taking talent strategy very seriously. So it starts with a mindset. If you don't have that mindset, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. And we can certainly talk about it. So, Scott, thank you. This was super fun. I loved how you explained everything. It really, it made it so helpful for even me to understand it even deeper. So I appreciate that. And hopefully people will appreciate that as well. So people over everything.
Sounds
So,
good.
all right, I will actually hang on a sec. I'm going to stop the presentation, and then you and I will chat for a minute. Everybody,
Perfect.
thanks for joining Something New Live, The Why. Have a great day.